Hi, I'm John Cutterback.
And I'm Sofia Cutterback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Today is a green thumb, why you don't need one to homestead.
Well, I have to admit that all of a sudden it sounds like you're changing your tune, Mr. Gardener Man, because so often in your conversations and in the work that you do, you have really, really been underscoring the importance of growing things. Like you just even have said, if you can't have a garden, just have a pot, grow something. And so all of a sudden that seems to be a little bit of a change of tunes here, that you don't need to have a green thumb in order to have a household.
Well, good. If it seems a change of tune, then I think it's very important that we speak about this. And I think it's even something we need to speak about for our own marriage's sake, because I know this has at times been a little bit of a point of tension. And I suppose I'm not going to back off. I don't want to back off from. I don't think it's appropriate to back off from a real emphasis of importance of agriculture, broadly speaking, the natural place of gardening and other related husbandry kind of things, meaning husbandry in that more kind of specific sense of taking care of living things. I still want to really emphasize how I think, especially in our age, that's something very important in homesteads. But I'm still going to say you absolutely do not have to have what most people mean when they say having a green thumb.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's really great news, because I have to admit, as the non-green thumber, which actually I'm not sure that I don't have a green thumb, but in any case, by practice, I don't have a green thumb.
Or you've been made to feel like you don't have one, maybe.
No, not so much that. It's just more that I think just the natural distribution of labor in our home. I have spent more time protecting the garden from children, very young children, and also mostly I take care of what comes out of the garden, and that's been really great. But the growing, I definitely, when I go out there and think, oh, I'm just going to plant a few seeds and this flower or that flower, I definitely feel a little bit out of my league, and actually what comes up or doesn't come up can be very discouraging at times. So I have to admit, when you talk a lot about gardening and growing something, I can't help, while I totally intuitively feel the importance of what you're talking about, I can't help but empathize with people who might be listening to what you're saying, who have no experience of gardening. Because when it comes down to it, I realize part of my non-green thumbness is, frankly, I just don't really have a lot of experience. And so I just feel for the people who are listening who have no experience, and you say, start a garden or grow something in a pot outside your back porch. And I just go, oh yeah, this, for someone who doesn't know what it feels like to put something in the ground and just stand over the soil and watch and watch and watch and have nothing come up. It just makes me wonder, like, oh, wow. I wonder if you know what that feels like. And so this is good news for those of us. It happened
once when I planted something.
Oh, you.
Just kidding.
But so in any case, that's great. Let's talk about that. There's hope for those of us who do not know how to miraculously sprout things from under our fingers.
Well, I'm glad to share that, and I have to say, I certainly, in speaking on this, and both in formal occasions and informal occasions, I hear people say, and clearly sometimes with some pain, some frustration, some hurt, some fear. Mm-hmm. I just don't know how to do the gardening, agriculture, countryside thing. Yeah. It's not me. It's not intuitive for me. But everyone's always saying, okay, if you're really serious about having a healthy environment for raising your children, you want to, here's a great option to go. And I have to admit, and this is why I really do want to talk about this. I think a lot of people in that circumstance, kind of, or in that situation, feel that they're going to have a second class homestead,
Mm.
and that and that they probably feel that my answer, though I certainly haven't intended my answer to be this way, they probably have felt my answer was kind of like, well, don't worry, just try really hard and you'll hopefully be okay. You'll
Mm.
figure it out, and in the end, you'll just have to make up for the fact that you don't have a green thumb, kind of
Mm-hmm.
approach. And I think they can feel that they're always going to be at a disadvantage. And why do I have to be in this unfortunate situation? Why did God do this to me? Why, with all the other problems I have to face today, could I not just have felt a little more naturally inclined in the agricultural area
Mm-hmm.
to make this be easier, because I really want to do this for the health of the family, for the life of the family, and for so many other good reasons that that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So I really do feel that, and I think if we discuss this, we really have some good news. And I think part of that is going to be give me an opportunity here as we think this through, to clarify some of my own thinking about this. And I know that your experience um, really, I think, can shed some light on this, right? Because I mean, isn't it the case that you have yourself come to now feel, okay, it's absolutely fine that I didn't feel naturally inclined towards this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not simply that everything ends up being okay because now you've figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's something we've come to a deeper insight, and maybe to see this is actually to see all the more why the agricultural things actually are so unique, are so specially fitted for Homestead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So let's get to the good news. So,
okay. Well, I mean, tell me this. Do you think we ought to just, should we, should we say again out loud a couple of reasons why we have been convinced by our own experience, as well as from my reading on this and teaching on this, that agriculture is so important.
yeah, that would be great. I mean, this is a little bit harkening back to our previous podcast about why should everyone homestead? So when we talked about that, you listed 3 reasons that you thought that it was important for people to engage in some kind of work growing things. Can you
Yeah.
just say
Well,
those?
I mean, I think part of what we did in that, I think it is good to start there. What do we mean by homestead anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Should everybody homestead? And there, the focus is that there's the broader sense of homesteading, and then there's the narrow sense. And the broader sense is what every home should be a homestead. And then there's the homesteading in the more narrow sense, that not every home is going to be a homestead in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. And so what we meant, the focus of the broader sense was, there does need to be a kind of rootedness and connectedness to the earth. And I think the way that we put it was, there needs to be some kind of work in the home.
Mm-hmm.
To call someplace a homestead,
Mm-hmm.
there has to be a certain productivity in the home, a certain kind of work that especially unites us to our own bodies,
Mm-hmm.
unites us to the earth, and unites us to one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was in the context of that we said that um, working in the soil seems to have a really particular way of doing all 3 of those things.
Yes,
And
right.
and I thought that was really interesting as a non-gardener. It really made me pause and reflect, even my experience and my poultry efforts and growing things, how growing the experience of trying to grow something and then caring for it after it's growing has definitely been an experience of uniting me to myself, to others, and to the earth. So, as a kind of novice gardener, so to speak, from my own experience, I have found that to be very much true.
Right. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good. 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 Well, and our experience aligns on that,
Yeah.
but also by putting it that way, it allows us to kind of unfold that there historically. It's so important to recognize we're going to always learn things from history. There certainly are homes where there's other rich work going on. Maybe it was some type of crafting things out of metal, crafting things out of wood, maybe crafting things in cloth, where that was the main kind of work that would go on in the homestead, in the home. And so their home wasn't especially characterized by a focus on husbandry of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that fully fulfills this broader notion for
Mm-hmm.
sure of being a homestead. I think it's interesting that I think we can pretty much say that though it was pretty much transculturally known, felt, and experienced, that well, you still grew some things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like, why would you not? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's one of the interesting things of our age. We've been so removed from it, feeling in any case no real need to do it. Well, we can always get food easily in the supermarket. Has kind of removed something that had always been there for people of good food. Of course, you would at least take the opportunity to grow certain things in your homestead. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't thought about. It was just kind of
Mm-hmm.
taken for granted. And so there, I think, even if we certainly don't have to be farmers, but that there is a kind of naturalness and fittingness. Doesn't mean it's absolutely necessary, but there's this real kind of naturalness and fittingness to at least doing something along those lines. That's why, pretty much as a blanket statement, I like to just say to any married couple, just go ahead and at least do something.
Yeah, it's interesting as you make that list of the types of work that would have been present in a traditional household. It just strikes me that of all of those things, growing something in the soil, gardening in some sense, is really the one thing that kind of is most universally available to the contemporary household. If you think about things like making cloth and furniture and, all kinds of things like that. I mean, those things are pretty esoteric and
Yeah,
remote in
great.
the modern
Yes,
context, right? And
exactly.
so it seems that in any case, if you look at good work, that gardening is something that's available to all of us in the modern context. Although it feels like when you talk about gardening, there's something particular about gardening that's different than crafting wood, something out of wood, which obviously is going to have certain characteristics that do fulfill that need for working in the household. And I'd like to just draw you out a little bit. Why do you think that what makes gardening different from, for example, weaving cloth or
Good. That's
fashioning
great. Oh,
furniture
that's
out
a
of
really
wood?
good,
It
good,
also
good,
just seems
good.
like there's
Yeah.
something different about that.
And if I could just have to pop out a thought that so struck me when you said that this is even more available to us today. It struck me. Um, the way that we have access very easily to water
Mm,
is just a very concrete, practical thing
as we're in the
that
middle of a drought right
that
now.
that makes right. I mean, right now, our experience, if we might not have been all bad for us to have to work a little harder. But be that as it may, there are people who live in climes
Right.
now that, because they have a well that goes down really deep, they're able to, keep that watered, fit it into their busy schedule that they don't
Yeah.
have to run to the spring and get something.
Right.
So there's kind of more universal availability.
Mm.
But I love, so why especially growing things as opposed to those other wonderful crafts, there's something unique about taking care of, stewarding, husbanding, wifing,
Mm-hmm.
wiffery, something that's alive.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately it's always about people and connections between people and formation of people. There's that close proximity, likeness between taking care of a herbaceous, herbal plant, living thing, and taking care of persons.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, human life is about taking care of people and learning how to take care of people. And the first principle in that is you have to begin by seeing how the people, as it were, naturally wants to grow anyway. What is
Mm-hmm.
their nature calling for and demanding? And so the great Greek term paideia, which we translate as education, but more broadly means formation of people, which for the Greeks is always at the center of life, because because formation of people is, in a sense, what people do.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to understand how incredibly rich and broad, and we're always trying to form people, even trying to form ourselves as adults, but it always has to be rooted in kind of the very first principle. What is the given nature? What is the nature? What is human nature calling for? In so many bad forms of education, bad practices of raising people, both the positive mistakes that are made and the kind of negative ones of just not doing what should have been done, are rooted in not really seeing what's there. Well,
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, gardening, dealing with the living thing, if you don't, you first thing about planting seeds is you need to know, even just from its size, the size of the seed determines how deep you plant it.
Mm-hmm.
That already is just this great sign right there of you can't just do anything you want with that seed. You need to get to know the seeds. And more broadly, you really do need to know what this species is, when it's going to flourish. So that's not just how deep. When do you plant it? When in the season do you put it in? And from then on, again and again and again, it's learning to observe what's there and respond to it and foster it.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a fundamental life lesson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, wow, that really strikes me that's why gardening is so important, is because it's an observation of how to help something live in a way that is most flourishing for it. And that observation, if it becomes a habit, then is something that really graces your human contact. Yeah.
Amen.
That's really, that's
exactly.
great.
And
So,
go
well,
ahead.
I
Go
have to
ahead.
say, just as you were saying all those things, I thought, okay, you have to know the size of the seed, how deep it goes. I can't help but think of several years ago, before the first wedding in our family. I was so excited and I wanted to plant all these beds of esoteric flowers. And John you're so good to me that you no longer say to me, no, you can't grow that kind of flower in our temperature or climate. You just let me go ahead and do it. I was so excited. I planted all these beds of seeds, and I just remember kneeling over the bed in the garden and kind of raking it, preparing the soil. And you were on the far end of the garden planting vegetables. And I said to you, well, how do I know how deep to go? And you said to me, you just looked up at me and you said, sweetheart, you just have to think like a seed. And I just remember feeling this incredible, like, glunk inside of me, like, how in the world does a seed think? I thought, wow, thanks a lot. But on the other hand, it really kind of arrested me. And I thought, wow, I really, like, that means something. How does a seed think? And that was just it was kind of a aha moment for me about how to even approach my complete and total not knowing about how do I handle this kind of stuff. But anyway, just to go back, from that experience and that moment of how in the world does a seed think? You were just describing, okay, you have to know. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bells are going off for those of us who are not green thumbs. You seem to be underscoring and actually kind of more meta importance about why we really ought to learn how to take care of seeds so they grow. So I just needed to bring you back to the topic of the conversation, but you said we don't need to have a green thumb.
Right. Okay.
So if it's so important, what are you thinking when you say we don't need to have a green thumb?
Thank you. Let's say what I think people hear in their mind when they hear a green thumb. They hear someone who has a natural knack for this.
Mm-hmm.
someone who is kind of comfortable with it. The green thumb is not referring to simply only if you have a green thumb can you grow something. Everybody knows that someone who doesn't have a green thumb, in any case, might succeed in growing something. But in general, if we just say, "Oh yeah, he has a green thumb," "Oh yeah, he has a green thumb," this is actually interesting. This struck me as I just said that out loud. People will say that about anybody pretty much that they see regularly planting.
But also successfully growing things,
Okay,
right?
But what they don't realize is it is, all right, in some sense then, a green thumb, you say someone has a green, anyone who then is reasonably successfully doing this, we probably would say has a green thumb. But but at the same time, I think we tend to also mean by it and be thinking this, you have a natural knack for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's akin to feeling like it's almost like magic. Like,
so
wow,
right there, I mean, don't
this,
we see a connection?
Gift.
We tend to assume that those who are doing this all had a knack for it. And so let's just bring this out into the open. And there's something here kind of obvious. Obviously, there can be people that are doing this and are doing it with good success who didn't, quote, start with a green thumb. They just did it. And this is one of the key things that needs to come out here. It is let's make that much clear. If we mean by green thumb someone who seems to have a natural disposition for it, and I do think there is such a thing. The whole nature nurture thing is always tough. It's tough quick because this is very relevant. Think about this in sports. Some people look at a child when he's 8 years old and say, "Oh, well, that child's just naturally good at sports." What they don't realize, perhaps, is that child is in a family where they were playing sports from the time that the child was 4. And so he just has a knack for it now because he's just simply started doing it. And it had nothing to do with his being, quote, naturally coordinated. He became coordinated because he's just been doing it for a while. This does not deny that there are certain body types that are more disposed towards sports. And so that's what I mean by the nature nurture. Was it inborn from the kind of genetics? Genetics make a difference. Or nurture is just kind of the practice that you've had. And so sports is a really interesting nature nurture thing. And I think that we've actually, sidebar, had an interesting experience with that in our own family where it particularly coming from your side, there tends to be a genetic disposition towards being good at sports. And one thing that we've noticed without going deeply into it is that can actually lead towards someone having a real comfort with it and not really having to work on it very much. And then maybe even being finding that it came kind of easily, doesn't so much immediately see, oh yeah, I got to do the drills on this, and even finds it frustrating
and onerous.
That if in this particular sport, say I'm not excelling the way I found myself easily excelling in this other one, kind of like, well, forget this.
Yeah, I'm just going to quit that.
Because it's just supposed to come easily. So this interesting aspect of it coming easily can actually undermine one's putting into it the kind of work to cultivate it that you really should have. And I think we can that will carry over as a very good analogy for, okay, maybe there is a kind of even genetic disposition in some, a bodily disposition where this is going to come more naturally, regardless of the nurture, the surrounding circumstances. Is that it is what it is, and it's not what it's not. I'd say it, as so many other things, it has pluses and minuses. And the same thing. Look at there's pluses and minuses, and this will bring out how it's going to be good for all of us, whether we find ourselves already disposed and having a green thumb. Okay, fine, let's run with this. But to the extent that we find this difficult, we actually might be the ones that more have to discover it for what it is, practice harder at it, and really come to have an appreciation for it that no one else would. And I think that's absolutely key.
Yeah, I have to say that as being the non either by nature or by nurture, not inclined or disposed to gardening, that has been my experience in the little bit that I've done and been able to do successfully. I was just pruning our hedge of lavender that we've talked about before, and that's kind of been my project. We've had this hedge for 20 years, and I was as I was doing it, I was just reflecting on growing the lavender and frankly the failures that we had in growing it from the very beginning. You helped me put the lavender in, but it's kind of been my project. It was my brainchild to begin with. It was the kind of non-essential part of our gardening, so it was like, sweetheart, if you want this to work, that'll need to be your project, because I've got to take care of the stuff that we're eating in the backyard. And so I just was reflecting on how we had 2 runs of total failures, like epic fails, the wrong variety of lavender, and then the next time maybe better variety, but planted it the wrong distance from the wall behind it and things like that. And that was very discouraging. And now finally, after a long time and a lot of failure, I feel like I understand lavender plants now. And so I was just thinking about what a gift that was to me, and I wonder if my experience is maybe in some sense richer than yours, who now you have an ease and facility in growing things that I was just reflecting how I feel like I'm a different person, because having to figure out what in the world I was going to do to make this lavender not die really made me kind of stop, pause, just kind of look at the lavender, think about the ways that it had kind of crumped over and died, think about how I had made an error in pruning the previous season or watering fails. And it's really kind of made me a different kind of person inside. So I had to just push the pause button and stop and really observe something outside of myself. And so I feel like it's created this expanded place inside of me that is a quieter place that has to just stop and just look and observe and then respond appropriately. Or every time I use the clippers and I cut something off of the lavender when I'm pruning it, I really am thinking, what does this mean for the plant next season? What will it do next season? Is this going to make it struggle? Oh, I think it needs air in here and circulation. And so then I take out even some living branches. And so it's really, every time I get into one of our plants that we're pruning and I have to stop and think that way, it's really an awesome experience for me, because there are things that I'm very good at and that I'm competent at in the home and making the home that I never even think about. I'm just getting to the end result, getting to the end result. Gardening can't be that way for me. I have to pause along the way and really look at the thing and have it speak to me, and I have to project into the future. And so it's actually an incredibly calming, centering, and I have to say deeply satisfying experience for me to kind of, I very much am aware and have an experience of my inability right next to this newfound ability. And I just wonder,
That's
do you ever
huge.
have that experience of very much remembering your inability in something, when every time you drop a seed in the ground, you have a reasonable expectation something's kind of come up and you're thinking of, okay, and then when it's growing, I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. So in a certain sense, you are doing all the same things that I'm doing. But just when things are our potted plants, which I've now figured out how to take care of our potted plants on the front porch, and just a consistent yield of aesthetically pleasing environment, it just gives me such an incredible sense of intertwinedness with these plants in order to make them. I guess I'm still very aware of the miracle that happens through my agency, which.
Well, I do. I think that was it. I mean, that is, to my mind, absolutely the center point of this question. And I couldn't have said that. My experience, I mean, it's the great panoply. It's so funny. It's almost like sometimes in the realm of faith, you realize there's something irreplaceably wonderful that a convert brings, that everyone else kind of looks on and goes, whoa.
Wow. Yeah.
And
We're kind of almost envious.
And
Yeah.
I'm not over here saying, I might be tempted sometimes to say, wow, kind of, why aren't I like that? Why can't I see that? Why can't I
Mm.
experience that? Well, I can experience it through that person. It really gives us a sense here of how we're a community. And I just realized right here how much richer my own experience of husbanding, my own experience of taking care of living things can be, if I right now can learn and really enter into your experience
Mm.
and be in awe of that. I mean, I was actually tempted as you were saying what you were saying to say, well, you got the better end of the deal here.
Yeah.
I wish I could experience that way. And it's so funny because, in a sense, what you or others might consider to be my green thumb, and it's certainly nothing, that's going to go down in any history book. But I am comfortable with gardening, and I'm incredibly grateful to my father for, so with me, whether there was something by nature, there probably was, because I was especially one of the children in our own family that just found myself out there wanting to just be next to my father when he was doing it. So
Yeah.
there might be something that was already from nature that made me interested to attend more closely.
Yeah. And the reality is you did have the moment that I'm having right now. You just had it a very long time ago. And just like,
Maybe that's true.
people who are old in the faith, I guess, you know, thinking about people who are just new and experiencing this incredible gift in a aha moment, that it's an invitation for those of us who have had it since before we can remember,
Right.
to just
That
revisit
is
it
a
and
good.
see it again, right?
That
So
is
it's
that is a good analogy. You're right.
you're not condemned to never have that experience.
Okay.
It's just
Thank you.
that my experience helps you to be renewed to the wonder of the garden.
And it maybe makes me have it in a more explicit way, because in a sense, I never had that
Sure,
experience
because it was
because
so
of my
organic. Yeah.
right, organic, like it,
Yes.
and early, where there wasn't a kind of intentionality and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So you having as an adult to have to work through it gave you this vantage point of consciousness where I never had a conscious experience of, this is so amazing,
Yeah.
because it was just given to me kind of prior to that.
Yeah. 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 Well, I'd love to just share, just kind of as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about my own experience. And I just thought there's something I'd love to share with our listeners that might be an encouragement to those who are just starting out and really have no experience. I know for myself, one of the great difficulties that is a barrier between myself and trying with gardening is failure in gardening is somehow, I don't know, more painful. Maybe it's because you're so excited. There's an inherent excitement to see something sprout up from the ground. And there's this practical element, like, you want to have flowers for your daughter's wedding, or you're really hoping to have tomatoes to can for the next year. And so failure is very, really, really disappointing. And again, and thinking about our lavender, while I was pruning it, I was thinking about our failures. And what became very clear to me is that the failure was very much a part of my being able to observe and learn the habit of a lavender plant. So that now for me, I'm not a horticulturalist, and I would be afraid to give too much explanation about how a lavender plant thrives, because I'm just speaking from observation, and I can say what we've done and it's really worked.
Hmm.
But it's the failures actually made that experience for me. And so the other thing about gardening is, it's such an investment. You prepare the soil, you put in your seed, and then you have to wait the reasonable amount of time for the seed to come up. And by the time you discover it's not working, you're already too far in the season to put in new
Hmm.
seeds. And so it just feels like, oh, now I have to wait till next year. And it's discouraging because there's a bit of time that's wasted in the failure of it. And, it's been 20 years and we have an incredible lavender hedge. And, it was 4-5 years that the failure was affecting, where, it looked scrubby and we had dead plants and it was lots of money and investment. But now as I look back, that it's the failure.
Not too much, by the way. I mean,
Well, when you're on a very, very slim income,
you were probably actually spending some money that I didn't realize. But
no, it's just it's just relative. You know, that was early in our
I interrupt.
domestic life, and so it's all relative. But in any case, it just now from the vantage point that I have, I realize that the failure is actually exceedingly important, and that if we can go into the failure and not go, oh, I have no tomatoes, total waste, not total waste. Now, if you go into that failure with the kind of a mind that's open to be formed by the experience. And so you can't say gardening is simply reduced to what comes out of it. That if the value of gardening is about what it makes in us, like my experience realizing I'm a different kind of person when I have to pause and figure out why the lavender is not growing, then when we fail, if we kind of open that interior space and just say, why? What could I have done to make this a more hospitable environment to my tomatoes? Then I just think then the failure becomes an incredible gift that is actually part of next year's growing, of next year's plant of the tomato. It's not just dropping in the ground, fertilizing it and watering it. It's actually last year's fail becomes this year's fertilizer for not just a really great tomato plant, but for a gardener who runs his finger down the stalk in a different kind of way, looking for, little flowers that are going to be tomatoes, who takes the tomato off the vine more carefully so you don't snap a different part. Like these are all things that I've learned in, working in our garden. If you just kind of rip that tomato off the plant, whoops, oh dear. I hope John doesn't see that. So, it's really like something changes inside of you. And so the fails are actually part of the fertilizer.
Yeah.
And maybe not having a green thumb makes your experience as a gardener.
And dear, once again, listening to you say that gives me a sense of, oh my goodness, it's why you almost don't want to have a green thumb.
Yeah.
You do, and the things that I've missed. But again, it just accept what's given here. And again, what a fundamental life lesson. I mean, these things you're expressing, it's not just, well, that's kind of cool to learn that. That's a neat insight. This is the center of life, that to realize kind of that failure is a normal part of growing. Is this central lesson. And it just having this conversation makes all the more clear to me, again, something that, I've read in Xenophon, I've read in Cato, and the wise ancients saw this, and here we are, and some things fortunately don't change because they're so beautiful and so true. The life lessons. And one in particular, it jumped out at me. You see this in Xenophon, you see this in Hesiod, where they say the farmer always begins by praying. And I've just realized there's much more there than meets the eye. Right? That they always begin by praying.
Yeah,
that it comes of
receptivity.
This deep experience of there's something much more at work here, and what I'm doing is my part in something bigger that was started by a cause that's before me, that will be completed by a cause that in certain ways I'm just an instrument. I mean, you talk about failure, it makes me think right now of clearly droughts are part of the gift. They make you realize, hey, and this is why sometimes all this work we've done to, be able to be secure against every possible thing going wrong with all our technology. They got by with their farming, before they were able to overcome every problem. I'm not saying, it's a balance. It's not bad to develop reasonable technology in this area, technology that actually enhances the art rather than replaces the art. it's kind of another discussion. But the normal travails, something as simple as your dependence on the weather, your dependence on the change of season, your dependence on the soil, your dependence on the natural process of the breakdown of these things. All of it helps us realize again and again we are part of a wonderful plan that we did not make, that's prior to us, that's given to us, that was intended for us. We didn't just stumble into it. We were placed into this context. Yea, indeed, we were placed in a garden, and we were told to take care of it. Mm-hmm. So this is just such a huge part of getting, of realizing something about human life and our fundamental identity. And here it is going on again right here.
Yes, I just love that image of receiving something, because it really seems like there are two gardens going on. There's the garden of the soil, and then there's the garden of our interior disposition, which ironically, you're planting the seeds in the soil, but the very act is actually planting a seed in you that has to grow. And so it's really, it's really amazing how it's this truly symbiotic, like in the most profound sense of the word, because it's really the same thing is happening, going both ways. And we have to kind of be open to
Amen.
that.
Amen.
And it just strikes me too that you were saying, there is this practical side of gardening. Of course, you need to produce food, right? So it does matter if all your crops die because there's a drought. But in the world that we live in now, where there's not that urgency of the practical, because if your garden dies, you just go to the grocery store and you get more food. And so I feel like in the modern world, the practical element kind of makes us decide, well, do we keep something or do we get rid of it? And so from a practical perspective, you could just get rid of gardening because we can just get it all at the grocery store. But I think in deciding, do we get rid of things or do we not get rid of them, we sometimes have to look at the side of it that's not just the practical side. And that helps actually kind of clarify. It's really a gift in a certain sense. You can say, oh, modern times, it's so awful. But it actually provides a gift for us because it pushes us to say, is that the only thing about planting seeds that makes it be a worthwhile endeavor? The practical side.
Right. Yes. Right.
And
Perfect.
so in scrutinizing that, we realize it's giving us an opportunity to say, well, is there another reason for me to crawl around on my hands and knees and, try again to get this tomato plant to come up? And it's great talking about it because it makes you realize, yeah, there's this other reason, because it's growing something in me that
right. Again and
makes
again
me grow.
and
Yeah.
and that earlier on I was thinking, what if someone were to just say, well, okay, great life lessons there, love this conversation, heard that life lesson right there, I'll take it to heart, and do I really have to get in there and muck around myself? Can't I learn this lesson through the eyes of others?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, and of course, to some extent, the answer to that is sure, you can learn it through the eyes of others. Just like we were kind of talking earlier, there were certain things by our differences of nature and nurture, different roles, natural roles, the difference between sexes, all kinds of things. There are things that by God's plan we're going to see through the eyes of others. But I just think at the same time, we humans we're very funny. We can be incredibly thick-skulled, and it's one thing to kind of intellectually get a point. We all know this from life experience. It's one thing to hear it and go kind of like, oh yeah, it's like hearing a good sermon. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great, okay, boom. Glad I've heard this, but we only learn certain lessons by their being unfolded, enacted in our life. And there's something about, once again, the uniqueness of the husbandry arts here, the agricultural, including also taking care of animals, not just plants, that has this unique kind of relentless, ongoing aspect that it keeps bringing it back to us again and again. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just think there's much to be said here for making this to be a natural, ongoing part of what we do, that it's there as a source of cultivating our souls. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
when you say planting seed in the ground, you're planting a seed in yourself. You're cultivating the earth as a way of cultivating souls,
Mm-hmm.
yourself, your own, and others. That's always going on here.
Yeah, and as a non-gardener, I totally want to add to that it's a physiological experience. It's a principle that's rooted in the physiological. And I just have to share this image, which is such a powerful image for me. Sometimes when we're working in the garden together early in spring, I'll just observe you as you're just working away. And I don't even know if you realize that I'm watching you. And one of my favorite things to see is you've prepared the soil, you've turned it over, and you start running your hand lightly over the soil to just even it out and get rid of the clumps. And yeah, I could just see that you're being 100% practical in your mind. There's a purpose for that, which is occult to me. Like, I'm not exactly sure why you're doing that. But just seeing that it's a different motion of your hand when you're rubbing your hand. And very often it's your left hand and it has your wedding band on your hand. And so it just really
Hmm.
strikes me. So I'm watching that incredible, gentle touch for a purpose that, and I can feel the soil under your hand.
Wow.
And
Oh my.
it's just an amazing
Hmm.
experience that makes me, as the new gardener, standing kind of on the outside looking in, going, there's something incredibly dramatic happening on the tactile level that, again, you're just preparing the
Wow.
bed and I'm standing on the outside and and it's affected the way I handle the soil. When I touch it now, I realize it matters. Is this the light touch or is it the heavy touch? And what is the soil giving back to me? Like, it's really formed my experience of getting in the soil. And so
Wow.
it's not intellectual. I mean, there is an intellectual aspect. There is a
No,
concept
but
aspect to it
yeah.
that just keeps kind of imprinting itself on us through the physical experience. So it's
Wow.
worth failing, even
Uh,
if none of the seeds
Oh
came up.
my. I don't think I'm ever going to touch soil again in the same way now that you've related that.
I
That,
love
I
it.
mean,
It's so
that's
awesome. I actually, since I
remarkable.
first noticed it, I just love early spring to catch you in the garden so I can see that again.
Oh my
It's like literally
goodness.
every time you do it,
Wow.
it's when you prepare beds.
Wow.
I will say too that, I mean, we haven't really talked about this, and in a certain sense, it's kind of a different conversation because you talked about manipulating or just kind of producing something, and we've always chosen to grow our gardens organically, and I think that the use of chemicals is often a little bit of a short circuit for some of those requirements to actually observe, enter in, and actually physically manipulate the environment. That, I mean, if you've committed to not using a chemical to make something grow and you have tomato plants that are wilting, you're just standing there over this plant going, what can I do? And you start getting out Rodale's book and you're looking at, what's wilt
Yeah,
cause. And we've
it's
realized there are
true.
certain places in our garden we can't put tomatoes or we don't put them in the same bed every year. And this was, again, learned after a fail. And so it's, apart from ecological arguments for not using chemical fertilizers and nutritional arguments for not using chemical fertilizers, there
Or
we've even or
pesticides.
pesticides, yeah, very important pesticides. You picking off the squash bugs manually when you're out there watering,
Hmm.
again, that's a requirement to be present in the garden in a way that's different if you just short circuit it by using the chemical. And so I just want to say that
It's a great
the
example.
organic
Very important.
approach to gardening is the one that actually really relentlessly requires you to open up the door of your soul to really
That's
observe and
huge.
grow into. And so
That's
I
powerful.
just really, it's harder. It's much harder. And there are a lot more fails. And it is an unbelievable invitation to go in, to go in, to go. And the more you go
Gosh.
in, the more you grow.
It's almost a whole nother discussion, but it's not another discussion. It fits perfectly with this one. And I just want to fully agree and give the example. This year you just gave it, but I want to second it. We've had so little rain. And I've Interestingly, I'm not going to say anything here. It depends upon one's own circumstances, what tools, what technology you use, and some people have suggested getting the waterer where you just put the line in and it's constantly dripping. And there's something very important to be said for that,
Mm-hmm.
because it actually saves water, not as much runs off, and that might be an answer. But it's interesting as I was thinking about it, and I'm just still going to have to make our own judgment. But in our garden, I was normally this is not the case in Virginia, but to just keep my squash going here, I had to be in there pretty much every day, early in the morning, watering, and it got to be a bit burdensome. But I got this for the first time that I had this experience of as I was going through watering, I was able to kind of hold the slowly running hose where I wanted to put the water. And then I just would look around at those big, beautiful leaves, me looking very carefully and looking for those clusters of squash bug eggs and or a squash bug. And with my hands to go in and first of all to try to grab a squash bug before it drops off and rolls away is itself a bit of
Mm-hmm.
a and yeah, I'm going to say it, a trigger warning, something's about to die. And I crushed those squash bugs, and that's not a pleasant tactile experience, but I think it's a fitting one. I mean, I need to get rid of those pests. So it's akin to slaughtering animals. I like to, the extent we can, kill ourselves, the animals we eat, because it reminds me that something has to die in order for me to eat its flesh, something that you're very seldom reminded of otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And if these squash plants are going to live, certain squash bugs are going to have to die.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing in doing that by hand, and then carefully going into the crook of a leaf and pulling out and then crushing that little cluster of eggs that they left in there. My squash plants have lasted longer because I never am willing to use the pesticides, and they would tend to have sooner died because of the infestation of the squash bugs. But having to be in there watering every day, interestingly, I constantly was getting those eggs as they were
Mm-hmm.
being laid, and I really feel more connected to those squash plants, the way that I had to keep a very close eye on them
Mm-hmm.
is unique
Yeah,
and
and by
powerful.
extension, their fruit too. When we're
No,
eating it, it's
exactly,
like we've enjoyed every
exactly.
summer stir fry so much because it's been so
Well,
precious.
exactly. So,
Hard
kind of
one. Mm.
once again, a kind of natural plan. If we're willing to work hard and discover something that you wouldn't have thought that you would have had to discover, by learning to observe very closely.
Yeah, and for those of you who have never done it and have absolutely no idea, it's a really exciting adventure opening up to you. That it's kind of a first for you, and in
Amen.
some ways, there are delights of experiencing it as a first that are yours alone. And so go in with confidence and joy.
Amen. Amen. Now, before we close, can I just give you a little apology? I realized and I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Marital conversations are important in so many
Mhm.
ways. Really, when I heard you say if you just listen, if I just listened to you, I heard you say that I said to you something like, "Look, I've got to get these vegetables in, and so if you're going to kind of do that lavender, you're going to have to do it yourself."
Mhm.
I want to. I hope I didn't exactly put it that
No,
way,
no, no. I mean, obviously, you helped me plant them,
but
but I
nonetheless,
had to care for them,
but
the
look,
daily care.
but clearly, I conveyed to you a spirit of flowers are second class citizens in our garden.
Hmm.
Clearly, I conveyed that to you, and something is just striking me now. Okay, granted, there is a practical aspect when push comes to shove. In hard times,
You're not eating
you're
flowers.
you're not eating flowers, at least most of them, and you're gonna prioritize the vegetables
Mhm.
for an obvious reason. But that said, there's something important about recognizing beauty is essential in the home.
Mm-hmm.
And you have brought that. You have brought that to our garden. Right? I've shared the story in other contexts of I never, on that gardening I did when I was young, I never even thought for a moment of planting a flower seed
Mm-hmm.
until I met you, basically, until we. Maybe I wonder whether even when we were courting, I started. But in any case, from early on in marriage, I started to have this dawn of, oh my gosh, it makes Sophia really happy when I grow zinnias. Well, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can squeeze a few of those in, and
Yeah.
no problem with that.
Now we have lots of
And
flowers in the
now,
garden.
almost too many. But I just wonder whether well, not wonder. I say I needed to come to a new vantage point. Lavender is I mean, it's there waving in the wind with its great scent,
Yeah,
with
it's
the honeybees on
unbelievable.
it, welcoming people to our home, welcoming guests,
Such a
welcoming
gift.
us when we come home and sitting outside and that fragrance. What an incredibly beautiful part
Mm-hmm.
of our homestead.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not superfluous. Okay, none is absolutely essential. So in any case, just I
Yeah.
want to apologize because what in certain ways a little microcosm of I need to expand my worldview and a little bit beyond the pragmatic
Mm-hmm.
and recognize beauty is essential in the home, even if
Mm-hmm.
there's a hierarchy where you know you would have to prioritize vegetables in a certain circumstance. Most it might go through our whole life where we never have to worry about that, and prioritizing beauty and growing beautiful things over a lot of other things that we might have done in life
Mm-hmm.
is just kind of another instance of, I mean, the home decorated by flowers cut from the
Yeah.
garden, going to visit another person and
Unsurpassable.
bringing them flowers. If I'm going to visit somebody, I'm like, well, dear, should we just bring them a zucchini?
Mm-hmm.
Which can be fine, but bringing them flowers is normally a little more, and the wife, immediately is like, oh my gosh, and notices it, this, and hopefully the husband does too. But, in that great, amazing plan, flowers are so beautiful and important. Thank you for teaching that to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
love growing them now.
Yeah. And maybe some ways for the beginning gardener, flowers um, are a little bit easier to start because you're not expecting that you're going to eat it or
That's a good
provide
point.
something for the family
That's a good
table. And
point.
because it has this gratuitousness to it, it's less intimidating.
Good
So,
point. And somehow failing a squash plant can feel, maybe that's just me, a little bit more like, I was supposed to get squash out of
I
this.
don't know. I feel that way about my dahlias. But
Yeah, okay. Maybe I'm going the wrong direction there.
anyway.
Gio, thank you so much for this discussion. Great to share this discussion with you all. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to next time. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.